the kind of technical academic term for this is fortress conservation, where you've got a plot of land and it's been put aside, and there are park rangers, and they make sure that nothing happens inside that plot of conserved land. My argument is that this fortress conservation is not working.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Christoph, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Today's episode was really enlightening for me. It's kind of an area I've never thought of prior to this, but I really enjoyed it. We're talking all about tree theft. Now, Lyndsie Bourgon, she wrote a book called Tree Thieves, which she detailed very objectively, in my opinion, all of the aspects that go into tree theft. And I didn't even know this was really going on to an extent where it made an economic and actual social impact, right? So yeah, apparently trees are being stolen from our forests at a rate that actually has a huge impact, and it's a big deal. And how do you catch someone that's stealing a tree at a time, or a part of a tree at a time, and the cumulative impact of all of that? And what drives someone to want to steal and sell stolen trees, right? What were the circumstances that drove to that? How do you police that? How do you stop it in a forest, in forests, the size of North America? Lyndsie did an incredible job. She dove into this whole concept, and her objectivity and thoughtfulness is what made this book incredible. And I learned so much listening to it. So thanks, Lyndsie, for agreeing to come on and to tell your story and the story of a bunch of different people, from some of the tree poachers to some of the law enforcement officers to people trying to police this internationally and all that kind of stuff. It was just so well done, and I can't wait to get into it. You're going to learn a lot, folks. Let's do it. West Fraser is the #1 sponsor for 2022. I cannot thank them enough for all of their support. They allow me to do this the way I want it, and you can't ask for much more in a sponsor. So thank you, West Fraser. Greenlink Forestry has been with me since the beginning. They're another sponsor, and again, can't thank them enough. Wouldn't be possible without them. Damaged Timber is another sponsor, and go to damagetimber.com, put in Your Forest 10 at checkout for 10% off. They put damaged timber in your home. Go check it out. You'll figure out what I'm talking about. And finally, a partner is Forest Proud. Forest Proud, they're looking to keep forests as forests, and they are in the game of using forests to fight climate change. So yeah, really happy to be a partner with them. So without any further messing around, let's dive into this very interesting, very complicated, very intriguing idea of tree theft and all of the social, economic, addiction, and all kinds of maybe injustice that have created these situations. Without any further messing around, let's dive into this with Lyndsie Bourgon, talking about tree poaching. I wanted to talk to you first about something unrelated to the book, or not directly related to the book. Was, how does one come about becoming a National Geographic explorer, oral historian, writer? How does that? I feel like that's always something, growing up, you see the magazine and the TV, and you see, it seems like this epitome of outdoor environmental media, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does one get to there? I'm curious what that route looks like.
Well, so I went to journalism school for my undergrad, and I worked as a freelance reporter for many years after that. And I went back to school. I got my master's And that's when I started learning about oral history. Was I was getting my master's in environmental history, and I was really interested in the kind of intersections of people talking about the environment and the history of the environment. And there were some very clear links to the parts of journalism that I really liked with that. So that really got me going. And the National Geographic Explorer program is a grant program. So I applied through the storytelling funnel for that. And I knew by that point I had heard of timber poaching and I had become obsessed with it. So I knew that if I was going to do some research in the global south, for instance, about timber poaching, that I would probably need some funding to do it. And I had learned about National Geographic and the grants through like the Banff Center and these groups of environmental writers that I had come to know. So I applied for grant funding for that. And when you get accepted for a grant, they say, congratulations, you're an explorer now. So, which was a very cool thing that I never thought, I just never would have ever imagined that would happen. But yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Feels like you made it, right? It's cool.
Yeah, that was a big moment for me, actually. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. And I'm sure there's plenty of imposter syndrome to go along with that, making it too.
Oh, yeah. Especially when you're there doing your work and you're just you, but you have this name kind of following you, like the big name, right. And you kind of just want to be like, I'm just normal. Like, I don't know anything, so that is ongoing.
Yeah, I think that's inevitable for most of us, right?
Yeah.
I think it's good. It's healthy. It keeps you leveled and keeps your head from getting too big. So it's cool.
Yeah, I don't want to ever feel too comfortable with it.
Sure. But you're the first National Geographic Explorer I've spoken with on the podcast. So I feel like I wanted to ask that question because it does seem like one of those, I don't know, one of those big deals. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
So
no, it was. And I'm so grateful for, it's an amazing network of people as well the project that I had originally got funding for ended in 2018, but I still feel really part of that community. So they're very special.
Yeah, that's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So you said you were already kind of obsessed with tree poaching at this point. And to be completely honest, it's not something that I'm really aware of. Like I was aware of, like illegal logging, like in that sense, like in South America and even, everywhere else. But the term timber poaching or, the tree thieves, like you like to say in the book, it's not something that I was really familiar with or even really thought of. Like I knew people like around here, populated areas, you'll see areas along the road where people have cleared for firewood clearly, right? But it's Alberta. It's 80-year-old pine trees. Not really the end of the world. Sucks. It looks dumb, but because it's not being reforested and that. But that was about it. I never really considered it in the context of coastal North America, right? And how that poaching changes dramatically and changes this, the impact and everything else. So, okay. First of all, how did this come to your attention? Obviously you're in coastal BC, so that probably helps.
Yeah. Well, actually I was living in Toronto at the time that I heard about the first poaching case, which, that makes up the kind of, prologue to the book. So there was a cedar tree in the Carmanah Walbran on coastal BC on Vancouver Island that was poached in 2012. And that was how I first heard about this issue. So, I did interviews when I was there and then I kind of dropped it, but I had always thought about it. And then when I moved out west, I actually moved first for a couple months to Haida Gwaii, the Queen Charlotte's, just to live there and see it and to do some writing.
Sure.
And then you're really amongst those coastal forests. And so I had a better sense of what it means, first of all, to like even see an 800-year-old tree and the massive size of it and just how key they are to the ecosystem. And so I started taking the research around it a lot more seriously once I was out west. And I became very one-track minded about it. I won't lie, because I started I never really considered myself a science writer, but I started reading a lot about poaching and realizing like this is a cultural, political story about environment, and it just like lit a match in my brain, where I just thought I'd never considered this story. Well, no one else had really published anything from the cultural side about it. And so I really decided that I really wanted to dig into it.
That's cool. Well, I mean, it's so easy to say, oh yeah, some asshole poached a tree. Like, it's easy to just say like, oh yeah, just a greedy person trying to look for money, like, or whatever, right? Some scum person. And like, but it's so much more difficult to stop and pause. Okay, why did they feel the need to do that? Why did they have to resort to that? Because I don't think that's most people's, most people don't want to do crime. It's not, if they have other options. So I thought that it was a really interesting way to go about it, and great way to go about it was to actually dive into the full context, as we'll get into here. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit. I want to paint a picture for people about what we're talking about, more specifically in the North American context, and we can add context from everywhere else after. Before we get into the conversation about the socioeconomic stuff and why people are doing this and all that, I want to get into all that. Because I do feel that the book, as I'm sure you feel, is almost it's more of a story about people than it is about the trees. The trees are just kind of the mechanism to talk about the people.
Yeah, thank you, actually, because I was really wanting it to be that way. And not that I don't love a good book about trees, because everyone does, but no, it's a people story, and its identity, for sure. And I guess I kind of came to see environment as nature as including people through it. So
yeah,
that was a big
Absolutely.
moment.
Well, I mean, we are people, right?
Obviously.
We can't perceive environment without talking about people. Like that's inevitable. We can't separate it. It's not possible.
I know, but I don't know if everyone thinks of it that way all the time. So
you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people, especially those who are disconnected from, probably don't. Yeah, we've kind of lost that connection a little bit, right? I think I talk about that lots on the show, and even on Good Fire, my Good Fire. I'm not sure if you're aware of that series, but yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah.
And we talk about that a lot too, about the Western culture's disconnection from nature and this seeing it as another thing, something to protect, not something to live with and prosper on, and to also help along as like a partner in some kind of relationship, right? And so, anyways, we're getting off track again. So much to talk about.
Really, because I think, and there's a little bit in the part of the book there where I'm going to have to remind myself what source it was. During the 1978 expansion of the Redwoods, I think this is where it came in. There was a quote there from... Oh,
you're talking about the one about the... yes, I know what you're talking about.
And
the city dwellers.
He essentially says that we understand that where humans fit in nature, and that's why people who might actually be more disconnected from it might think that they're feeling heartbreak around a tree being logged. Because that disconnect actually creates the heartbreak, not the logging itself. Anyway, yeah,
no, that's right. I remember it a little bit. It was like the people in cities who are, they say, he differentiated by saying in cities, people in cities who feel this huge emotional tie to these environmental causes are not supporting it out of empathy for the environmental cause, but out of a disconnect from it and a guilt in that. Something
guilt.
Like that.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
It was the guilt of being disconnected from it and wanting to find that again. Yeah. Which I found it's easy to judge people and say that that's what it is, but I think that's pretty on the head for quite a few folks, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't apply to everyone. And there's a lot of, kind of political nudging in that, by using the term city people or
I'm a city person,
or, whatever you want to use. Yeah. But I think the sentiment is on the right line, along the right line, that it's clear.
And that was something that
I really appreciated about the book is that you didn't just have, and I want to get into that later, actually, that like you very much covered, I feel you fairly covered all the characters in this book, all the types of people in this book very, very well, right? Like I didn't feel there was any kind of lean towards one or the other. Like you spoke about the environmental activists and I feel like entirely kind of describing the atmosphere, describing the type of people they were, the things that the reason they were there and kind of why you thought, what they were doing was happening. And then you did the same thing for loggers and for the thieves and for the scientists and for everybody. And you just kind of painted a great picture. I felt that was kind of unbiased and pretty high level. And I thought it was great there's times in it where I felt myself being like, oh, is she really going, is this her opinion? This is where she's going with this. But then you change gears and I was like, oh no, she was just pointing out
because I don't know what my opinion is.
Yeah, you're figuring it out, which is great. Which is great. It means you're open to anything, right?
Yeah.
So I guess
I'm really glad that came through because the writing process was like that.
Great.
Where I'd catch myself too and I'd be like, wait, so maybe this is what I think. And then I'd be like, wait, but no, because remember there's this perspective on it. So, and I still have no clue.
I think that's the right way to go about it, though, right? It's funny that we find ourselves wanting to take a stand and have a hard opinion and something to defend, right? We want that, but like ultimately, that's the wrong thing because then you're doomed to defend it and not be open to new information. So, I felt. Anyways, a great book, so good. Thanks. I loved it, and we're going to talk more about this perspective and you're painting this picture. We're going to talk more about it soon. Okay. First of all, because this book is about stealing trees. Stealing trees? I said that terribly. Trees. Stealing trees or stealing wood from the bush. I want to paint a picture of what this poaching kind of looks like. We'll get to the socioeconomic of what led to it, but what is being stolen? You kind of mentioned it's kind of the gamut from big stumps to whole trees to everything. But can you paint a picture of what's going on the coast and how rampant it is? Maybe to provide some context for people to understand and kind of picture it in their mind so they know what we're talking about.
Sure. It may actually, maybe I'll take like a geographic approach to it. So
sure.
I'll start on the island, the Vancouver Island, and maybe go south.
Okay.
On Vancouver Island, I spent some time there shadowing natural resource officers, NROs, on Crown lands. And then there's also poaching from BC parkland as well. And those trees that are being taken are old growth Douglas fir, usually, or often cedar, sometimes maple, but maple seems to be poached more in Washington state. What it looks like, kind of surprisingly to me, the first time I went there was, riding or driving down Forest Service roads through Crown land and seeing first on the road large branches or chunks of wood, a lot of greenery, a lot of foliage coming off the trunk of the tree itself, because actually that stuff is useless in a way. And the NRO officer would kind of pull over and say, like, there's a huge pile of duff. I kind of think your listeners will know what duff is.
Yeah, organic matter. Yeah.
Organic matter. Yeah. And he would just step off the road, maybe go a few feet behind a couple bushes or like smaller trees that are lining the road and find stumps and usually large leftover bits of wood. Like if the tree was particularly big, there might be trunk remaining there for someone to come back later and get it. That wood usually is taken to smaller mills or might be sold online by the person who poached it, or might be bucked up into firewood. That's a very common use for that type of poaching, is to,
which was surprising actually. Sorry, I just want to interject for a second, because that was something that came out really strongly in the book, was the fact that even there were certain drug dealers that were actually wanting to be paid in firewood, so that because they knew they could drive south to Vancouver and sell it for like $700 a truckload or something. So they knew it was like a higher profit margin, and it's like, so even firewood is like a crazy commodity in these places.
Huge. And I mean, actually, I've kind of experienced that a bit myself. Like I live in a town where a lot of people prefer wood heat, which I totally get. I think anyone who has had a wood stove knows that like it is like really good heat and it's affordable. And especially these days when we've all been seeing our bills go up by like 75% or whatever, wood heat is it still is a huge resource for a lot of people. So, that's fairly common. And what was told to me by the NRO and what I've since seen even in my own kind of research is that wood is often just posted on Facebook Marketplace. Like every community has a little info board. And it would just say, I've got truckload of firewood, $250, $300, you know? But yeah, that would be, it increases in value the closer that you get to larger cities. And there is a quote in the book from a community forest manager saying that he had heard through the grapevine that there were some drug dealers taking payment through wood because they could flip it closer to the cities. So
crazy. Just crazy.
Yeah,
not something I ever would have thought, right? Like think about what it would take for a drug dealer to be like, I don't want money, which I can spend immediately. I want wood so I can drive it. Like they're taking the risk to drive it. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. It's just like adding risk, but they're totally fine with it. Like that's interesting if it's true. Yeah.
It is. And I think also to hit on another theme in the book, and it is a little bit difficult to talk about, but because there is such widespread drug use, often in the poaching community, you're actually just getting rid of the middleman in that. So the poacher can take the wood directly to a dealer and maybe get payment in a combination of ways, you know. I haven't actually, I didn't hear that firsthand from anyone on Vancouver Island, so I'm a little bit hesitant to suggest that might be happening all the time. But, you know, as I profiled in the book, some of the poachers in the book, you know, this is a very common issue in that population. So to see a drug dealer involved in that way was surprising. But then also I thought, well, it can't be that surprising, you know, because why go through the second step of selling it to someone when you could take it directly to the dealer? So, but yeah, so the further south you go, you know, different trees are poached in Washington. Very common for figured maple to be poached. That has its own very unique market. So often in Washington, those trees are going toward like very beautiful bespoke products like guitar blanks, pen blanks, maybe kind of, I don't want to say trinkets, but like tourist items, things that might cost a lot of money, but artisans purchase.
Artsy fartsy stuff.
yeah, a little bit, you know, or, you know, there are some larger cases of poaching from that area where wood was milled into lumber at mills and sent off for, you know, processing into hardwood flooring or, things like that. So that's very common. And then further into Southern Oregon and Northern California is where you're seeing redwood poaching and redwood burl poaching. So the book talks a lot about two particular cases of burl poaching. There actually is mention in there briefly of poaching of also a whole tree. It's less common for that to happen, but it does. Partly because redwoods are just so massive that to take down a whole tree is a large task. But burl is incredibly valuable, redwood burl in particular. And so it's sawed off trunks, chainsawed off trunks and taken to burl shops or sold online to artisans who are turning them into tables or statues. Any sort of kind of beautiful bowls, very common.
Do you want to explain what a burl is, just for folks that might not know?
Yeah. A burl is it's a growth, a knobbly growth that comes off the side of a trunk. Redwoods have absolutely huge burls. So there are some photos of, these kind of beautiful stick straight redwoods, and they've got these big, huge bulges right off even sometimes in the middle of the tree, but usually closer down to the root. Mm-hmm. And the wood inside is just so smooth, which is what makes it valuable. It has almost no knots, and it has really beautiful kind of grain and pattern on it.
So
but
swirly.
It's also, pardon?
Very swirly.
Very swirly.
Grains and just, yeah.
They call it bird's eye. So it has this kind of very distinct pattern to it. But it's also ecologically really important. So often burls will be either right at the base of the tree or underneath the tree in the root system. And it actually ensures that even if the 95% of that redwood is cut down, that the tree's genetics itself can continue on and saplings sprout from those burls. It is essentially a DNA holder, genetics holder for the tree. And so often they're cracked open in fire. So not just redwoods, other trees have burls. And if a forest fire comes through and kind of burns out the forest, the new growth is going to come from those burls. Mm-hmm. So they really hold a lot of ecological importance as well.
Absolutely. Well, it was really weird for me because it's not something like when I first started reading the book or even just saw the title of the book, Tree Thieves, I immediately just thought whole trees, right? Uh-huh. And when I started to see the pictures and the explanation that you gave around literally just like chunks of the tree cut out, but we're talking like chunks of the tree that are the size of a tree, basically. Particularly,
it paints a different picture. There's one case in particular where they took out 8 feet chunks out of the tree. So and deep too, and like to the point where when you look at it, you're like, how can that tree survive? But apparently they do. Well, some of them do, and some of them don't. There's a lot of debate around this. I think there's a little bit of discussion in the book where basically there haven't been a lot of studies done on what happens when a burl is removed from a tree. And that's because these trees are so old that it would need to be an intergenerational study that someone 200 years from now could say, okay, a poaching that took place in 2019 or 2018 then led eventually to this downstream effect. Yeah. When you have such a long successional period. Yeah. Like you're saying, like humans you don't have the lifespan to figure that out. It's not like you can do a 2-year study and know that's no context for it for sure. Totally. Yeah. And so it has left a gap in knowledge, and also kind of a gap for, speculation as well. Yeah. Around what if it means anything or if it doesn't. Right. But that there's one of the poaching cases in the book talks about a very deep, tall cut into a redwood, and the heartwood was present. They took so much out that the researchers and the investigators could see the heartwood of that tree. So that does weaken the structure of the tree, the ability of the tree to stand up. It also opens it up for disease and for a certain amount of mold and bacteria and stuff to get into where it normally would not. So it puts the tree at risk in different ways. Mm-hmm. No, it's a big deal for sure. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that paints a good picture of kind of what we're talking about. And do you have any context for? I mean, this is hard to quantify, but I know in the court system they kind of sussed it out a little bit. I mean, there's the direct economic sale value of that wood, right? And then there's, like you had mentioned a bunch of times, was the ecosystem services, kind of ecological health. Those things are harder to quantify, but we know they exist. Can you put some numbers to that to try and just contextualize the scope of this tree poaching? And I know you said there was a video that you had on the article you wrote that said something like estimated that 1 in 10 trees in BC or something like that was poached or something like that? Well, that's in the Forest Service land in the United States. And the Forest Service, they estimate, and this is actually an old number, so it might, it is a little bit out of date, but it's actually also the most up-to-date number that they have. Sure. But annually, they estimate poaching off Forest Service land to be valued at $20 million a year.
Wow.
And they that accounts for 1 in 10 trees felled on their land is poached, is taken illegally. So it's massive. I think some of their investigators have said in interviews in the past, like, this happens in every national forest. It is a huge problem. So it is hard to quantify, partly because it also relies on them stumbling upon the crime scenes, which is really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
The Forest Service, they did some studies in the early 2000s, and at that point the number of 100 million came up. So that's how much they value timber theft off their land every year, $100 million. And that 1 in 10 trees felled off of their property across the US is poached. In British Columbia, that is 20 million from Crown lands. So that actually doesn't even consider the BC parks lands as well. That's coming from public lands that might be used for different uses. And then in the US actually, the entire country outside of just the Forest Service. So this is like also poaching off of private timberlands and timber sales and things like that. It's valued at $1 billion a year. So it's an absolutely massive crime. And it just keeps actually increasing every year since I followed it, which is really quite interesting to me. It does tend to kind of flux and flow dependent on the economy, but certainly since 2019, it's been on the up. Yeah.
I'm sure COVID hasn't helped. Yeah.
It has not. No, it has, of course, like everything else, played a role in it.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it was important to provide that context to try and, because I'm blown away that I didn't know these statistics or wasn't really aware of how rampant of a problem this is. That it's, there's that kind of theft going on, right? It's wild. I think
because it often doesn't happen in huge, big chunks. Like it really is sometimes like an 800-year-old tree taken here and 3 trees taken there. And, then it eventually does all add up. But it isn't on the scale of somewhere like the Amazon where you hear about deforestation and illegal logging happening on this just absolutely massive scale every day.
Yeah.
And I do talk a little bit about that in the book, how that, because we have so much, we don't actually have a lot of old growth left in North America. The old growth that we have left is really important because old growth is a carbon sink. And so for an old growth to be stolen actually does have quite an impact on the environment and a forest's ability to adapt to climate change.
Absolutely. Especially when it's in, it's such an old, ancient ecosystem that's, we're not talking about 200-year-old trees. We're talking about much, much older, much, much bigger, much, much harder to replace. Yeah, for sure.
Well, essentially impossible, right?
Yeah.
Because a dozen generations from now, it will be replaced.
Absolutely. Or more. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or more. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, and the ecological impact is a big deal. So, all right. Perfect. I think we provided a good picture of how kind of what to expect, what to think of. I think it's important just for people to understand. And then from there, so like I said earlier on, you talked a lot. Something that I was really excited to see was the amount of time you spent building the context for all of these different folks, for the socioeconomic situation, the politics, the pressures and the basic needs of the people and desires and emotions. And like, you really, really went deep. And I was just excited to see that. And so like, maybe we want to start painting a picture of why something like this is happening, right? Because you likened it a lot to the timber wars and to the war in the woods and to stuff like that. And to this economic disheartening of areas that were otherwise dependent on that wood, right?
If I can talk a little bit about how I even got there. So when I first started researching timber poaching, I started reading a lot of like poaching history.
Okay.
Because first of all, I just love history and I wanted to get into it. And
for an oral historian, that's important.
yeah, exactly. And so I had been reading books, and I could recommend a ton to you, but, there's this one book in particular called Crimes Against Nature by Carl Jacobi. And he had a chapter about timber poaching on the East Coast there. Okay. And he really set it up as, this is a crime that has deep connections to the urban-rural divide. And I thought, oh, well, that's very interesting. And when I started doing research in my part of the world in contemporary poaching, I thought, well, some of these poachers that I'm interviewing, they're mid to late 30s. What was happening around the time they were growing up? Well, the timber wars, in North America, or the war in the woods up in Canada, and timber wars in the States. And when I started reaching out to poachers, when I started approaching them and saying, like, will you talk to me about your case, and this crime and why you felt compelled to do it, they right away were launching into a lot of kind of anger toward the conservation approach of the timber wars, which I, very loosely was kind of late 70s into the 90s. It was a protracted period of time. And that to me really echoed the history of conservation and poaching history all the way back even to the Middle Ages, medieval ages that I talk about in the very early chapter. It's really part of a deep tradition of expressing distrust, expressing anger, and kind of sticking it.
You're right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, there were two layers of that. Obviously, my interviews with the poachers were really, they were just so open to me, and I'm very grateful to that. And, I was hearing a lot of just daily challenges of living in a community that just never kind of recovered from the transition away from industrial logging.
Right.
And what that actually looks like on the ground. And how poaching creates a sort of very quick way to earn money due to that. On a base level, it's an issue of, I know how to do this and I know where to take it, and I can get to, $1,000 maybe if I'm lucky, and that's going to get me through.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to point out the cultural significance of these poachers, right? And their connection to logging, right? Because it's not like, oh, they found a job logging and then they started doing it. It's like, no, it's a generational, been passed on. They've been doing it. It's part of they would consider it part of their blood, part of their identity. Yeah. Right.
Particularly in this one town of Orick that I spent quite a bit of time in, and some of the folks that I interviewed there, their families were there since kind of the biggest production time of the Redwoods history, and their family had moved there for that reason. They were like lumber families. They had fathers that logged in places like North Carolina. And then once that had kind of slowed down a bit, they relocated to Northern California, where there was a huge boom. And so, this is, it's logging as part of identity. It's part of how you fit into your family. It's part of how you see yourself contributing to the world, and to your community. And it wasn't always told to me in such a way, but that's how I recognized it. I think it really reminded me of, so I'm from Southern Alberta, and I grew up in ranching areas and farming areas. And it's always very hard for farmers, and, not that I'm ever saying a farmer would ever go out and poach something, but, I just heard the way that, these poachers were talking about like their family and their community and how they fit in and why they stayed somewhere that maybe didn't have a lot of like economic or commercial opportunity, but like why that's where they're from,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I could really understand that. Sure. For sure. I could hear that and say, okay, I understand that this is who you are. And because things had become so heated in those couple of decades previous, also their formative years, I will say, like
Sure.
your teenagehood, maybe your early 20s, for the older.
Trying to figure out who you are.
You're trying to figure out who you are. You also have to start earning money at that point. Like you're not a kid anymore, and you're growing up, and you're hearing a lot of anger around you, and you're hearing a lot of knowledge. Logging is kind of an osmosis career, they were explaining to me. I mean, I know that there's absolutely training and amazing programs and stuff that you can take, but at the same time, there's a quote in there from a teacher from Oric who said, a dad goes out into the woods and their son follows. Like that's how this career is passed on. And I forgot where I was going with that, but that's okay. Just kind of the type of places that these are. And, I don't think that Oric is very unique in the Pacific Northwest. I think there are towns all through the forest here that are very similar to that. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's very much that their identity, right? That's something that they don't, mm-hmm. That's what they know. That's what how are they supposed to do something else and start from scratch all over again? Mm-hmm. As if, learn a whole new career, learn a whole new identity, move to some place that doesn't hold the same values that they have.
Yeah.
And like, that's big, right? Like our community is everything. And if
mm-hmm.
to try and move away from something that is like part of your identity, like how do you accomplish that? And then the need to try and make a living and all that. I think that was made very apparent in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blown away by the honesty of the poachers that you interviewed. Like they were just right out there, right? Like, yep, this is what we did. And
I think I had a little inkling that it might be that way because one of the people I interviewed had been interviewed very briefly in a kind of a local news story before. Mm. And it was a great interview, and I'm actually pretty used to approaching people and having them be pretty open. I think usually if you come at it from a place of good faith and explain what you're doing and just say like, very truthfully, I really want to know kind of your perspective and your side of this.
Yeah.
It's okay. But also this is just a very quirky, open part of the world at the same time. Like it's such a small town. First of all, everyone knew I was there, and I was very lucky. Like people were introducing me to other people. And, so that was okay. Like I was kind of making the rounds in a sense,
sure.
But people were open. They were very open with their experiences. I don't think that that's anything new for them. My understanding was that they're generally pretty vocal about their feelings around town anyway.
Right.
So
well,
honesty is really important to in communities like that. Do you know what I mean? Like
I do.
Yeah,
I was just going to say.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, despite the fact that some of them are tree thieves or some of them are poachers, they're very honest people. And it sounds dumb to say that, but they wear their heart on their sleeves, right? Like
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. They know who they are and they're not afraid to stand up for it, right?
No, for sure. And I think, I appreciated that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it was important for painting the picture for the situation, right? And I think leading into that, like talking about like why they had this kind of stick it to the man mentality as well. When you paint that picture of the war in the woods and the timber wars and that kind of thing, and the pressures that were put on them and the arguments that were being made, and it almost seemed like the human side of the community was not a part of that conversation, or it was just overshadowed by which like we both agree, and like most people agree, old growth is important, and it shouldn't be something that's poached or like
or legally logged, because at that point it was about legal logging, right?
It was about legal logging, right?
And fair enough. Activists play an important role in changing a lot of kind of public policy around that.
Sure,
but I think, and hopefully what has come through in the book is that there's a lot of rhetoric that often happens around that is not forgotten.
Yes.
And so I think that there's there's some hindsight that we can apply to that by saying that perhaps a lesson to be learned here is to choose language very carefully.
Well, and it makes sense because you think about it for the activists, it was a couple of years of rah, excited, emotional. Yeah, we did it. We saved the redwoods. And I think most people would say like, yeah, that was the right thing to do in the long term. But for the people of Oric or the people of these other small logging towns that are completely almost non-existent at this point, they've been dealing with that for 50 years.
Yeah,
ever since it
remains.
Happened. It's an everyday reminder of how they got screwed over in their minds, and I would say like fairly, because it doesn't seem like there was a whole lot of support to help those communities out afterwards. I don't know if I could say that, but yeah, it was just interesting to point out that difference in like the activists in and out kind of thing, and then the people who are literally living there affected for the rest of their lives and their children's lives and everything else, right?
Yeah, well, I think the intergenerational trickle down is actually really kind of an important part of that, because I don't know if anyone at that point had really thought that through, that anger can exist 20 years down the line.
Sure.
About this event, I think I think when the park, so Redwoods National Park was founded in 1968, and then about a decade later it was expanded, and there were some kind of complicated acquisitions and stuff involved in that, and kind of stitching together a bunch of smaller conserved areas into one larger one. The 1978 expansion had a lot of social programming in it.
Oh, okay.
That a study later on found that the social programming actually just didn't work. And so there was a lot of reasons for that. But the 1968 original instation of the park did not. It had a lot of the, when they were consulting on the Senate bill that would create the park, there was a lot of expert discussion around how the towns would transition away from logging towards things like tourism, or, would the town see a huge population die out, and then where would could we retrain a lot of people? Mm-hmm. And in the end, that didn't come to pass. And I actually think that that's a really prescient lesson today, because this is something we might not be around logging, but just transitions are a big deal.
Yeah.
And they remain very timely and important. And I think, that the government did a study on Oric and Humboldt and the surrounding areas after the 1978 expansion. And this report just found that basically like throwing retraining opportunities at people actually didn't work. A lot of people did not want to retrain, and that there was not a lot of understanding as to why. And I feel like that's a really important takeaway that we need to start considering, because I think we've all heard the points of view around, well, we'll just retrain this population of people and put them somewhere else because but I think it's really important. Like a huge takeaway that I took away from all my research was that it was the logging itself and the forest itself that was important to that identity and that work.
Yeah.
So if you are an electrician at a mill, that doesn't mean you're happy to go be an electrician anywhere else.
Right. Yeah. No, like you said, the identity is important, and it never ended. That intergenerational trauma, and I mean, decades later. And if you talk about the importance of just transitions, if you want to quantify it, right, you can say, well, look at decades later, how many millions of dollars it's costing us a year because of the unjust transition, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's a real easy way to get the politicians on board. Be like, well, it's technically costing us $100 million a year in the States and $20 million a year in BC, or whatever, however you want to do it, right? It's a good way to get people to pay attention, I think.
Yeah.
And to recognize
I think too, that. And to think about, to have a little bit of like ancestral thinking.
Yes.
Right. To think, okay, well, 3 generations from now, what does this look like?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I think the world's waking up to the reality of intergenerational trauma and to socioeconomic justice. And I think we're kind of waking up to that now more than ever before. And it's only becoming more and more apparent that anytime we're talking about something like theft or drug use or whatever else, that's not the problem. The problem is the socioeconomic situation. You know, poverty is the problem. And these other things like theft and drug use are a symptom of that problem, right? And so we keep tackling the symptoms and wondering why it's not being fixed. And it's the same as, I think that was a lot of what I was tying into this is it's basically just ties back to poverty and disenfranchisement and a lack of being able to do what you identify as being, right? And it's something that was, it was interesting how closely it ties into basically every other poverty situation you're thinking about, right?
Yeah.
Like it ties in perfectly.
Yeah, it does. And I think the Pacific Northwest is like a very interesting backdrop for that. I think because of logging and because the changes in the industry were actually relatively recent to us in history. So we can really see, you know, what happened when towns that were once had stable economies had to shift very quickly away from those, and the downfall of not doing that correctly, or the consequences of not doing that very thoughtfully. Because and I do talk a little bit about this in the book. You know, there is pretty widespread unemployment in this part of the world, and a lot of social challenges like drug misuse and houselessness and all of that come after that. So, you know, Oric and some of the other poaching hubs that I talk about were part of that community struggling through that, you know. For sure. And they happen to be near very big trees. So. Right. That's where it developed. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you talked about the expansion of that park, right? And how the continued, like, it kept they made it and they kept kind of expanding and taking off more and more of the opportunities for legal logging and that kind of thing, which only further I can imagine being a logger in that area. You'd feel like, well, these people just hate me. They just hate me and my livelihood, and they just have no care. Like, there was one point where you talked about there's even illegal driftwood theft. Yes, right. Which is something that people are like, so what? It's driftwood. Who cares? Like, but it has important ecological impacts as well, and. The expansion of the park pushed it to, so there was a while there where the driftwood was on the beach. You could go on the beach. It wasn't part of the park. It was fine. You weren't allowed to do it, but it was okay. And then they push it onto the beach. They pushed the boundary of the park 30 meters into the ocean itself. There you go. What happened. And so, yeah. And it's also a little bit. So imagine being a person in that town, just like picking up driftwood, and then they're like, no, fuck you. It's in the ocean now. You can't go in there. And it's like, what? Yeah. Like, I would be, you would think that that's an insane. Yeah, I think you would be very angry, and then perhaps you might, out of resentment, go steal some wood. Yeah. You know, especially off the beach. That is you're right. That is a whole other kind of element of this. So there's burl poaching and tree poaching, and then harvesting the wood that gathers on the beach, because there's just an absolute ton of it. I think there's a photo. Yeah. There might be a photo in the book. I don't remember. It might not have made it in, but I've seen it before. But there's mountains of wood on the beach. Yeah, there's quite a bit. And there were kind of a number of elements that prevented that. So actually, you can apply for a permit at certain times of year to go gather the wood off the beach. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot there. Essentially, bureaucracy has been introduced there. Yeah. But there are also access for vehicles nearby was also prevented. Yeah. So it's very difficult to actually gather enough wood to make a dent. It's in a place that depends on firewood as well, right? Where it is, pretty much everyone I asked uses firewood in their wood stoves to heat their homes. So it's not just money; it's also just like keeping your house warm enough to, not die in the winter. Yep. Yeah. I mean, when I was asking people about how they used wood, it was like, well, we go down as a family, and we get wood for the, for the heater. Or I think someone said that, it's kind of like a young adult's task, at some point to go get, you and your brothers go get wood for the fireplace, for the wood stove. So those are cultural. Yeah.
In the cities, we do the dishes and take out the trash, but in the coast, you go get firewood. Yeah, for sure. Or even out east, I know in Maritimes and stuff, it's a lot of wood heat as well, right? Same kind of idea. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And so wood heat is actually, it ended up being a little bit of a thread through the book, because the first instances of poaching that I talk about generally were for wood heat and cooking.
Yeah.
And when I talk about the history of poaching in Eastern North America, when the first kind of conservation movement was moving west, that was about wood that was being used to like build sheds and fences and fill your wood stove.
Yeah.
And that use has continued today. So it's a huge, it's a huge market.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it all ties down to just like really, really creating empathy around these folks. Yeah. I felt you portrayed that idea well, right? Of like, hey, we have to understand this issue wholeheartedly and step into these people's shoes in order to try and solve this situation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I believe that. But I mean, I think through my interviews, when I came to really understand the anger of some of the poachers, I came to kind of see it from like a higher view of like, this isn't going to stop until that initial vein dies down. And because it's the only thing I do, I'm like, well, we have to like listen to people, but that's of course my perspective, because that's kind of my job. But
right.
That's how I came away from reporting on that angle of it, was that that over time, through history, so many kind of small missteps had been taken in working with communities and local people that it had compounded to this point, and and systems are set up the way they're set up in organizations and kind of not government departments to work the way they work, and they might have to change a bit.
Right.
Well, I think that there were some interesting, the poachers put forward some really interesting points, I think, that I incorporated into the book, which is that, and they're not wrong when they say that often national parks, especially redwoods, which is an iconic national park, people want to work there, they want to move there, and they're not from there. And so there is a little bit of that underlying, I think one of the poachers said to me, like, these people that are pulling me over, they don't know me. Like, they're not from here, and I think that they're making a kind of essential point there. And I don't know if it's at all practical to even suggest that people only kind of work where they're from or what they know, but I don't think it helps to have a lot of turnover in areas like that. Where being local and being known is important.
Right. Trust is everything, right?
Yeah.
You want to know someone enough to be able to trust them and to be able to know what they're like and to know how they'll react to a situation. But in those places where the law enforcement officers are maybe they are just getting siphoned through every few years, then it's hard for them to develop any kind of relationship or any kind of real trust in the system. And if all they're doing is pulling people over, and I mean, they're doing their job, right? They're doing what they're trained to do.
I don't want to criticize them.
No,
because their job is really hard and quite dangerous. And they were also very open and really explained things to me. So it's almost like an unsolvable conundrum sometimes, right? Where you almost think everyone should just sit down in a room and like tell their life stories or something.
Well, you're right. Well, it goes back to the bigger policing issue that is going on, being highlighted big time in the States, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the cops are the law enforcement folks are bad people looking to do bad things, and that's why bad things are happening. It's like, no, they've been trained to do things a certain way, and that's how we've known, and that's been the history. And now we're realizing that maybe there's a different, better way to do it, and that's up to society to put that pressure on the system to change that. It's so I think it's interesting how many of these other things have tied so well into this concept of tree poachery.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something I thought I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. Tree poachery. I might take that too. I wish I had it before, because when you're going through a draft of a book, it's like, how many times do I say poach or steal or,
Yeah.
poaching? Like, anyway.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, you're trying to change the words up a little bit.
Yeah, you're like Control F, like replace.
I have to use the same word in the same sentence like 2 or 3 times, so don't feel too bad. It's like
I know you don't notice but then you listen to yourself because it's kind of your work now, right? So,
yeah, anyway. Exactly. Yeah, it's funny. So I guess maybe you want to talk a little bit about. Because you did the last couple of chapters covered South America quite a bit, and more of the global perspective of tree poaching and illegal logging and the economic driver and the socioeconomic situation once again. So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit and kind of how that relates. Because I didn't realize, I knew deforestation was happening in the Amazon. It's always on the news, and I didn't realize the extent, and I didn't realize by whom. I think a lot of the assumption is that the deforestation is happening by big corporations looking to make a buck, and that is
which
some
it
of it
is. Right. I mean, there is a huge multinational economy in terms of that. But actually, my interests when I went down there, and what I came away with was understanding the kind of quite acute similarities between the regions in Peru that I went and coastal British Columbia. Actually, the kind of thing that I keep thinking about is that in Peru there was, I was very lucky. I went on to some conservation land that was being managed by an indigenous community, and they were showing me these poaching sites, and the trees were on a much bigger scale than an old growth Douglas fir, for instance. They were almost like way more similar to a redwood, just these absolutely massive 1,000-year-old trees that were being poached in this middle of this conservation area. And there were just like 4 of them in a 45-minute walk that had been taken down, just insane capacity. Right. And then I'm interviewing the community president and the tourism manager who's taking me on this tour, and he says, the thing is that this poaching is happening by folks that are just squatting over here on land. And, we're dealing with this huge influx and migration of essentially people from other countries who are migrating for work, and there's work available here, and there's somewhere where they can take this tree and they'll buy it without any questions. And I just, in my head, I thought, well, that's just like this one location that I saw on Vancouver Island where the NRO said to me, people are squatting on this land, living in tents, taking down trees and transporting it into the city where they can sell, well, maybe not a city, the edge of the city where they can sell it to a mill. Same driving force, and I almost didn't even know what to say, I thought, okay, well, this is the same. It might not be the same motivating factor to move on to the land and to take the tree, but it is in the end, it's about poverty and immediate financial security, and a market that's willing to buy a product that very clearly should not have been logged, because old wood, pretty much all mill owners can identify because there's not that much around anymore. So if it's like super nice and really wide and totally kind of uninterrupted slab, there's pretty good indication that it was old growth, and there's turning a blind eye. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, for sure.
And even in Peru, those trees were going for relatively small amounts of money. Really, which is very similar to what happens in North America when you need kind of a quick infusion of money that, you're willing to sell maybe an old growth Douglas fir for $300. The same is happening to the Chihuahua tree in Peru. That was the tree that I saw there.
I'm glad you said it because I didn't know how to say it.
Yeah, Chihuahua.
I was reading it and I'm like, I have no idea how to say it.
I realized maybe I should have put in brackets the pronunciation. Anyway, and those are they're very similar to our old growth. Like they're part of a forest system. So this plot of land that we were walking through, it wasn't a full forest of Chihuahua. There were other trees around it. There were other ecosystems kind of interacting with it. But they were kind of key species within it. And so in this one kind of plot that we were on, if there were 11 Chihuahua and 4 had been taken down in a month, that's a huge impact on that piece of land.
Right.
And for everything that surrounds it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. It's a big thing. And something you also pointed out down there was that a lot of the folks that are doing the poaching, they probably don't even know that that's poaching.
No. Well, that's exactly it. Right. So, and that was again presented to me through Ruhilye, the man who I was interviewing. He said, if you're not from here and someone says, okay, well, like you have logging skills, I'm going to give you some equipment. Just go to this little plot right here. And there's 5 Chihuahua in a walking distance, and bring them to me for however much money. That's really taking advantage of a pretty desperate situation and someone who might not even know to ask if they're allowed to do that.
Right.
And what happens is then you've got these kind of differing layers of concern. So the indigenous community that manages that land, you've damaged their ancestral territory. You might not know that you did, but you did. And it impacts not only their relationship with the land, but their responsibility to care for it. And they've been granted funds to take care of that land. And so, the poaching takes on all sorts of different meanings at that point because it might look like they're not doing so effectively. But then on the other hand, you've got a family of 4 that has set up a series of tents on the land because they need money and they need somewhere to live. Yeah. And so it's just, it's a cycle.
Yeah, totally. That was something that this is totally on the side, but something where you're talking about such a significant portion of the Amazon is managed directly by the indigenous folks of there. I thought that was incredible. I was like, how are they so far beyond like us, like in how those things are designated, right? Like I thought that was pretty impressive. I don't know if it's a perfect system, but it is, it is kind of quite different from our system. Right.
So there are concessions of land, and which you might think of similarly to here. You've got crown lands, and you've got provincial park lands, and you have national park lands and reserve lands and municipalities, etc. Yeah. And in Peru, they have concession lands and ecotourism lands and indigenous concession lands that are managed by communities, and they are really massive chunks of rainforest that have not been developed. And some of that land is preserved, is meant to be conserved, and some of it is meant to be used for, the community can log on it and maintain or kind of keep the profit, and some of it can be used to develop for tourism.
Right.
So
it's more local. It's a community forest, right? It's a community forest.
It's a community forest.
Yeah, so they're very much tied to the survival of that land, and so they're managing it in a more thoughtful way, right? Yeah,
very intentional way.
Yeah. So you did speak about the market pressures, or not market pressures, but that there's a big market around this, like the deforestation happening in South America and Madagascar and other places, and that I didn't realize how easy it was for stolen wood, poached wood, to get to market and like end up at Home Depot or in your desk or whatever, right? Like I didn't realize how simple it was to just like fool people with like faulty paperwork, and that this what was it, the Environmental Investigation Agency? Is that what they're called? They're part of
the
Greenpeace,
EIA.
right?
Yeah.
And that they like went to extreme lengths to like verify paperwork and like make sure that things were like the one story you told of the one agent going into the middle of the Amazon, walking for 5 days through arduous bush and trying to figure out and getting to the place where supposedly the logging had happened and realizing that it's a totally forested stand. And like, okay, this person's full of shit.
Yeah. And by that point,
like, that's incredible.
By that point, the ship with the poached wood, it's gone, and it's already changed flags 3 times, right? And it's, you know, I think that really shows how difficult it is to, once the tree has been successfully logged, it's really difficult to catch it before it enters the system.
Once it's wood and not a tree, it's like you're good luck. Yeah. Yep.
It's been taken, and especially if it's been allowed to leave port, then you've really kind of, you know, it's made it through the next stage of bureaucracy. And this is a challenge for customs officials everywhere, because I think that shipment eventually had made it to Houston, where it was caught. You know, like the customs officials had been informed that the ship would be coming in, and that the wood on it had been illegally logged, but that was a very kind of what's the word I'm thinking of? It was a very planned investigation. Not every investigation can be that coordinated.
Yeah, and collaborated too, right?
Collaborative, completely.
Yeah, lots of people involved, lots of organizations involved, and
it was a multinational investigation. You've got people on the ground in Peru and communities in Peru, and then people in Europe kind of informing people in the United States. You know, it's just completely. Really, really difficult.
And now, and I just wanted to mention it briefly, was all the kind of the CSI trees going on as well, right? Like the technology being developed to figure out, like they called it tree fingerprints, or you called it tree fingerprints and tree DNA and that kind of stuff to try and identify and create this catalog of trees so that they can be quickly identified and sourced based off their genetic material to a specific location. And like, it's getting pretty cool and out there as far as like, well, we know if I got this wooden desk, I'm going to shave a little piece off and burn it, and the smoke will assess it and say, okay, that tree is actually from this region in the Amazon, and that is bananas. That is crazy.
Because it is pretty, I mean, because they really identified that one of the challenges was that you might be a investigator in Washington State that goes to a mill in the town of Tumwater, which appears in the book. And you can see these stacks of wood, and you're suspicious that the paperwork attached to them might be forged or might not even exist. Like maybe the mill owner lost it or something.
Right. Sure.
But unless you could match, until very recently, unless you could match that stack of wood directly to a stump, and in the redwoods and the stories that I tell in the redwoods, they're able to do that through the grain, right? So they take a picture of the grain of wood, and then they take that grain photo to the stump, and they say, okay, you can see how it fits. Yeah. That is very rare.
Almost a literal tree fingerprint. Yeah.
Yeah. And really, like, I mean, the chances of finding the stump and the wood at the same time are just very, very slim. So the Forest Service, and then also the Fish and Wildlife Service Forensics Lab, have developed a method in which you can create a DNA profile based off of a sliver, literally just a tiny, tiny slice of wood, that will give you species. And actually, using these kind of two methods that they have, the Forest Service is creating regional locational profiles. So they'll take samples from trees all throughout a forest, maybe along a particular 20-kilometer segment of road, feed it into the machine, essentially, get all these readouts of DNA profiles. And then if a piece of poached wood comes in and they feed it through and it matches this array of DNA samples, they can say this most likely came from this 10-kilometer chunk of forest in this part of Washington, and we know that that's within park boundaries.
Yeah.
Like that's
it's a pretty
just
intensive
amazing.
Process to create that catalog though. But yeah. It's, once they get it, it's going to be incredible. Like I imagine you'll start to get
they have to sample every tree.
It's a bit of
it's a huge task. It's a big undertaking, but they've also got people that are just massively committed to it because it's such a problem. So.
It is, yeah. It's it's very, very cool, and also like a huge task. And it's interesting to see that those kind of resources are being put to that now, right? It's cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
very, very cool. And talking about the prevention and kind of the crime and the catching of and that kind of stuff, there was an interesting quote near the end of the book talking about I forget the exact quote. It was a conservation officer or whatever you call it, I forget, saying something about basically more resources, more officers, more intensive law enforcement is needed to try and catch these poachers. But at the same time, might that not simply displace the crime and drive poachers to earn money somewhere else, for example, your house? Right?
Yeah, I think that was the manager of the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. He
maybe that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. And I was very thankful that he said that to me because I thought, that
right. You're still not solving the problem. You're just you're attacking the symptom again. Like it's just not solving the problem.
And even on an international scale, the late conservationist and anti-poaching activist Rory Young, he wrote a whole guidebook to anti-poaching measures in Peru and Asia. And even he in the end said that this goes nowhere without socioeconomic changes. And I thought, if he said that because he was just very dedicated to creating different sorts of mechanisms and approaches and things like that. And he identified that after everything. It's quite remarkable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think he had a great quote that said that the sheriff of Nottingham's problem was that people liked Robin Hood,
Yeah.
And I think that's right. He had the community on his side.
Yeah. He had all these resources, but the community was on his side. So there was no way you were going to, Yeah, mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, it's true. And and I found myself, like I said before we started recording, I finished the book and got to the afterward, and I found myself sitting there wondering, I'm like, okay, well, you kind of left me hanging. I was like, what's the solution though? Like, okay, we got these problems, but what do we do? Does she have no conclusion? And then I read the afterward and I'm like, oh yeah, I like this. This is perfect. And it really made me excited what you came up with. So maybe you want to explain how you came to that and maybe, I guess how you came to that, how it came about for you that was going to be a solution to, or maybe a potential solution to this problem of poaching.
I guess I'm not. It's not a foolproof solution at all.
I'm not saying you have all the answers. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I know.
I thought it was a very interesting suggestion on your part, and I thought it covered all the bases.
So part of my work in Peru was that I was meeting communities that were going through poaching on their concession lands. And something that they had really adopted was this forest warden program, where they would build essentially very nice huts in the middle of the forest, and community members would take shifts going out to live there. And so I'm always very careful to say that it did not stop poaching, but it put someone in the vicinity to, for instance, hear a chainsaw coming to life, or to even see people on the land that maybe wouldn't otherwise be there, and just to simply have conversations with them. That is not something that our North American approach to parks has done almost at all. So our national parks, they don't really provide local employment opportunity outside of often the tourism market.
Kind of a few months a year of
very
employment.
Seasonal. And the connection is not based off of the land itself. It's based off of kind of the tourism influx and outflux and service providing and things like that.
Yeah.
But the forest warden service reminded me a lot of community forests that I had heard about. So there's a community forest in my community right outside our door. And I think you've probably talked about community forests a bit on your podcast.
Yep. Wells Gray, the one you're sitting in right now is the last one I talked to. Or not the last one. No, sorry. The last one I talked to was West Bank First Nations, but before that was Wells Gray. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. No. Yeah. So basically, community forests provide a way of conservation that also incorporates use, right?
Absolutely.
And it considers the forest from multiple angles, as opposed to simply the kind of technical academic term for this is fortress conservation, where you've got a plot of land and it's been put aside, and there are park rangers, and they make sure that nothing happens inside that plot of conserved land. My argument is that this fortress conservation is not working. And there's been a lot of discussion around how it doesn't work in the global south, for instance, where you have a huge market, for instance, of poaching of rhino horn and these kind of conserved areas of Africa that have a very fortress appeal or fortress approach.
Yep.
We also have a fortress approach, but I don't think that we've ever really thought of it as not working. But I think that in the terms
unless you talk to an Indigenous person.
Right, well, precisely. Precisely, right? So this is an element of that. So this is also a byproduct of that approach to conservation, not taking into account rural working class perspectives. And community forests are a step towards taking in that approach. I don't think they're perfect. The Sunshine Community forests that I talk about, they have poaching, but I think the difference with that is that their approaching can be, if they approach a poacher, they can explain that their ethos of the community forest in a way that perhaps a more strict park method wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. I thought that was a really apt conclusion. And I like the way you described it in the end, I think was, I'm paraphrasing, but something about, like the park system is kind of like the man, right? Like you got this representative who represents the government and whatever, right? They don't really have to respect that person because they're just the man, whatever. But the community forest.
That's the approach of a poacher. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Where you represented the community forest as being like, hey, you're stealing from your neighbor. You're stealing from us. This is not, this is a community forest. It's owned by us. And you're taking from your neighbor, from like the person down the street, from the community. And that paints, it's way harder, like you said in the book, it's way harder to steal from your neighbor than it is to steal from some corporation and or government, right? Which is, it's always easy to vilify. So I thought that was a great, and I agree with you. Like, I think I talked to community forests lots now. Like I said, West Bank First Nation, Wells Gray Community Forest, which is where you are. And also with Gary Merkel, who's a big advocate of that, and some other folks. And I've realized that, that approach of, because like forestry in general has kind of a public relations problem in that it's kind of just looked at as like, well, the deforestation in the Amazon is forestry. It's like, no. That's not forestry. That's illegal logging. That's poaching.
Yeah, that's not logging.
That's not.
That's industrial logging.
Yeah, industrial logging. It's not forestry, right? There's no sustainability aspect of it. There's no forethought into, non-timber values. It's just timber, period. Yeah. That's it. Whereas forestry is beyond that. It's trying to include all those values and all that stuff. And I think we're industrial forestry in Canada. And I'll just say Canada because I don't know enough about the States to really speak to it, but I'm assuming similar. Is supposed to be more inclusive of all those values and planning for them and thinking about them. And what we've failed to do, I think, not for lack of trying, but for probably lack of perspective, lack of collaboration, is to incorporate community values in a real way, right? Local community values. So I felt where the community forest comes in and it can go, hey, we are the community. Any kind of money that we get from this, we're going to put right back into the community investment, into the schools, into the seniors' homes, into recreational facilities.
Which is Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
that is the financial impact that that kind of more industrial logging did once have, right?
Right.
So
sure.
the community forest can step in on those kind of really important economic measures that kind of essentially disappeared when logging slowed in some areas.
Absolutely. And that part is coming back in, but where it gets, where I think it's better is that all of a sudden the planning is not just somebody like a forester like myself who's like, well, I think these things are important. This is what I think people care about. These are the values that I attribute to the landscape. I'm going to go manage for them. Now it's actually getting those people and talking to them and talking to the cyclists and to the hikers and to the indigenous folks and to everybody and getting them to show you how those values should be cared for and how we can incorporate them into the logging practices so that not only are we just keeping in mind those things and maybe avoiding wrecking them, we're actually improving them and increasing the communication and the collaboration and also the relationship of the community to the landscape, which I thought community forests is just, it's a shining light for that. Like, are they perfect? No, of course they're not perfect, but it's a good step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah. And I think it has to do a little bit with, like, I think with anything, you're probably very unlikely to find any sort of consensus amongst a community with all those different people in it. But
absolutely,
you've probably tried on a more acute level with your neighbors than in another approach that might be more state-based or federal and applied down.
Absolutely. So. No, I think it was a very cool conclusion, and I applaud you for like putting this whole book together this way. It's great. It really is great.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say too that I was so I'm always wary, and I'll ask your opinion on this, like if I should bring the very final line of the book into the promo, but it was very important to me that I had a poacher in there saying that it was Indigenous land in the end. I thought that was like very it's important to me that he said it. Because I felt that people might not expect these two disparate groups of people to be on the same page, but it was not lost on the poachers who I interviewed the history of clearing land in North America and disenfranchising Indigenous peoples. I think that was a theme that was on the top of their minds as well, whether they were Indigenous or not.
No, it was very cool because it definitely, it's not the stereotypical what, progressive people would imagine that someone working in the resource industry an opinion they think they would have, right?
Precisely.
So I think it paints a great picture of like, listen, these people they're involved and they're paying attention and they're living. This is part of they know more about this than you do probably.
Yeah.
As a person who sees themselves as a progressive in a city or something like that, right? These people are living with it and experiencing it and they're having these discussions daily. And I think it was an important context to provide for sure. Cause it just showed like, hey, don't just judge a book by its cover, right? Like you have to get to know people and understand their motivations. And it really starts to paint a collaborative picture of what's possible.
Yeah.
Right.
I think so. I definitely, I am wary of, like giving solutions or, in the end, but, I came away from my experiences in North America feeling like there is actually an opportunity for collaboration if someone would ask and if someone would be also open to maybe being a bit more patient than we might originally lean towards.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
I do think that there's also a lot of kind of airing of resentments and anger and all of that actually does need to happen and to be heard and understood. So
you got to grieve. You got to feel that grief.
You have to. And I actually don't think it was, it's not really within culture to always do that.
No, push it down. Keep yourself busy.
Yeah. And also it's like logging. It's like logging or forestry. It's a masculine world, right? So there's also all of that playing into it where you've got this kind of perfect storm of all these cultural forces just exploding.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, mm-hmm.
Oh no, it was, I'm always wary when I get an email from a publisher, right?
Yeah.
Or an author or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, okay, who's this person? What's their
Yeah.
deal? What's their? And I'm always wary, because I'm like, because I get a lot, not a lot. I won't oversell how many I get, but I get enough in a year that I start to get a feel for the language being used and like what's going to be okay, right? And which is why I always say, right, like okay, yeah, like I'll read the book and I'll get back to you, because it's like I'm not just taking everybody, right? And I was so happy to see again, I just have to say it again, because I was so happy to see that like you definitely took the time to be empathetic and to paint this picture fairly for, I think, anybody that's going to read it, like no matter where you come from or what your ideas are, your politics, your beliefs, mm-hmm. whatever, I think you're going to find stuff in here that you learn from and also see yourself in.
Yeah. So. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that so much. And it was a journey for myself in that way. And so I'm glad to hear that you also recognize that in the text as well, because it is there, right? Like my own kind of dipping in and out of what I actually think and being unsure. Yeah. So
learning along the way. I
feel along the way, indeed.
Yeah, so. I feel like I could see it in the writing. I could almost see where your opinion was going.
Yeah, I know it's hard, right? And people are not. People contain multitudes, and so there's all of that involved in it as well, where you're kind of empathetic and then frustrated, and all of this with various sources, and also with the history.
Yeah.
The history of logging can be quite, well, like as with any history, I guess it can lean one way or the other. And it can be quite political. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a lot going on, but
there's a lot going on,
but it's just really nice to see, especially someone like yourself you're maybe not of this kind of community or this.
No, I'm not.
Right. So like you came in from an outside perspective with your own preconceived notions, and really kept your eyes and ears open and learned the nuance of it. Right. Which I thought was like, it's just really, really great. So thank you so much for writing this book. And I hope it goes off like crazy. I hope you blow it off the charts. Here's hoping.
Me too. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My I don't know if I mentioned this to you in my email, but I heard about this podcast actually through my friend Ben Crossgrove.
You did, yeah.
So who is the soundtrack to all my writing and this book for sure. It's just what a delight.
Yeah, Ben was awesome. I told him in that episode that I recorded with him that when he sent me the EP or whatever, when he sent me the music for that album, the Into the Wilderness, yeah, the latest album that he had there, I forget. I told him that I listened to it every morning for like 2 weeks, and I wasn't lying. Like I feel like it's the perfect waking up kind of like ethereal, happy, contemplative music, and I still listen to it so regularly. It's so good. But yeah,
an extra plug for music.
Ben. Yeah. So this is awesome. So I guess we'll put a link to maybe a pre-order in the show notes and that kind of stuff, so people know where to go. So thanks a lot for everything. This is great, and I can't wait to share this with folks. So
thank you for having me.
Hey, that was quite a ride, wasn't it? I don't know why I try and cover so much in an episode, but I really appreciated Lyndsie. Wasn't she awesome? Like, she just has really spent the time to be so thoughtful, non-judgmental, and to really paint the picture fairly for everybody. I really recommend you go out and buy the book, Tree Thieves. It'll be out June 21st, 2022. So you can get it. I think it'll be, anywhere books are sold. I'm assuming Amazon and all the other stuff. So yeah, please check it out. Such a good book. I really learned a bunch, and Lyndsie's the best. So thanks, Lyndsie. Thanks everyone for listening. If you really want to help me out, you can share and rate and review this podcast on Spotify and on Apple podcasts. That would be so helpful. You have no idea how much it helps. After all, it's free content. The least you can do is, click a button for me. That'd be much appreciated. Awesome. Well, we'll catch you all next time in about 3 weeks. Looking forward to it. Take it easy.